Back in 2018, for reasons I've totally forgotten, I decided to see how many anime series I could watch within 1 year. Re:Zero, Starting Life in Another World, was one of the handful of series that stood out among the 40 or so that I watched that year. The English dub for Re:Zero Season 2 just ended a few weeks ago, so I decided to revisit the first season to refresh myself before I start watching the latest season. Over the last few weeks, I rewatched Season 1 as well as the director's cut, which includes the extra episode, Memory Snow, as well as an extra scene in the final episode. I still need to watch the Frozen Bond OVA, but I wanted to get this review out while everything is still fresh in my brain. Like most isekai series, Re:Zero is based on a light novel by Tappei Nagasuki. The series focuses on an energetic teenager named Subaru Natsuki who is suddenly transported to another world one night as he is walking home from a convenience store. It's not long until Subaru gets himself in danger while exploring the fantasy world he has arrived in, but a few people he encounters come to his aid. One of which being Amelia, a silver-haired half-elf who is accompanied by a great spirit named Puck. At the time of their meeting, Amelia was searching for an important item stolen from her by Felt, a teenager living in the poor side of town. Subaru decides to help Amelia after she saves him from some local thugs, but things take a turn for the worse very quickly. Re:Zero is not your typical isekai fantasy series. The setup for the isekai teleportation is weak, but at least it isn't the usual main character gets hit by a truck format that has been done to death. Speaking of death, spoiler alert, Subaru dies. A lot. After dying for the first time, Subaru discovers that he has the ability to travel back in time to certain moments after he dies, a power he decides to call Return by Death. Return by Death is a double-edged sword in that it can be detrimental to the writing, pacing, and overall structure of the show, but at the same time it helps distinguish it from its contemporaries and works well thematically. The main issue I had with Season 1, the first time I watched it, is the fact that it didn't seem to have enough time to get into its story. The majority of the season is spent with Subaru trying to resolve conflicts while getting the outcome he desires where the people he cares about survives. This means Subaru has to die a lot and many of the same scenes have to play out over and over, albeit with some changes, as the show progresses. One of the common criticisms aimed at Re:Zero is that it can be redundant, which I totally agree with. Another point of criticism against the show is the sometimes awkward dialogue, which I recognize could be a valid point, but I don't agree with entirely. The interactions between the various characters were one of the best parts of the show to me, and that is partially due to the dialogue. As you might imagine, each character has their own way of speaking, but some characters also have their own quirk that is often present as they talk. For example, Roswell sort of drags his words out in an almost playful manner, while Beatrice often refers to herself in the third person and frequently ends a sentence with, "I suppose." In my opinion, this adds a bit more personality to the characters that were already brimming with it. This is another element that helps to make characters more memorable apart from their appealing designs. There was one scene where Tappei overdid it with Beatrice's dialogue, resulting in some noticeable repetition. Aside from that one scene, this wasn't a recurring problem. The only other minor flaw I noticed with the dialogue was a minor mistake in the scene where Amelia tells the council that Puck controls fire instead of ice. I think most of the dialogue is really good, especially during the dramatic and emotional scenes between Subaru and Rem or Amelia. Some of the best scenes in the first season features these characters doing nothing but talking, and it's very entertaining. A large majority of the episode from Zero is literally just Rem and Subaru talking, and it's fantastic. Just watching Subaru and Amelia casually talking to each other in the beginning was enjoyable for me. There are several moments in the season where it started to feel like a romance anime to me, and for some reason I just find Subaru and Amelia's relationship refreshing. Back in 2018, this show along with Steins Gate made me realize how wrong I was for thinking that the romance element in Sword Art Online was good back in 2012. Prior to watching that show, I didn't like anime with any heavy romance elements in it. Subaru's relationship with Amelia and Rem made me realize just how poorly written Kirito and Asuna's relationship was at the time. I noticed just how complex Subaru and Amelia's relationship was and loved the fact that there was an actual conflict between them. I don't want to give too much away in regards to what happens, the cause of falling out between them, but basically distrust and misunderstanding is at the root of the issue. Subaru's ego is another part of the problem as well, and I think Tappei does a wonderful job with showing him come to terms with his own shortcomings. Subaru is a perfect example of a flawed but interesting and complex character. Like a lot of isekai protagonists, Subaru did absolutely nothing with his life prior to being transported to another world. Without spoiling too much, there are times where he can be extremely arrogant, oblivious to his own ignorance, and pursues self-gratification. There's a point in the middle of the season after Subaru's falling out with Emilia where I wish someone would knock Subaru upside the head for being so rude to people who are only trying to help him or give him advice. At the same time, there are several moments where you really want to root for him and can see the same good qualities that Rem comes to see in him. Speaking of Rem, this show does that character dirty on multiple occasions, despite her being one of the best characters introduced throughout the season. Rem is one of the few characters besides Subaru and a member of the Royal Guard named Julius that experiences significant character growth during Season 1. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think she's a better love interest for Subaru and overall character in comparison to Emilia. Rem seems more fleshed out and interesting given her backstory with her sister Rom and the demon lore. Perhaps that is an unfair claim since she basically gets more screen time with Subaru because of the way the story progresses, but I always felt that she was much more understanding of Subaru's struggles. Rem sees the potential in Subaru to be greater than who he is, whereas Emilia sees many of his faults and kinda comes off as dismissive, but not without reason of course. I understand Emilia's perspective in regards to what happens between her and Subaru and the fact that to her, his actions made no sense. However, Rem might not understand everything Subaru went through, but she's ready and willing to support him in any way she can. Make no mistake though, Emilia can be compassionate. In fact, this is one of the first good qualities we see from the character early on when she saves Subaru. I think the problem is that not a lot is really done with the character, especially during the second half of the season. The most Tappei does is show how the prejudice surrounding Emilia affects her mentally and to a degree her self-confidence. After watching ReZero for the first time, I thought that Rem overshadowed Emilia during the second half despite her being the main person that Subaru wants to protect. I'm not saying Emilia's a bad character, that's not at all the case, but she could use a bit more character development. Probably more screen time too. In general, I enjoyed many of the characters introduced in Season 1, and just to reiterate, I thought the writing for individual characters was mostly good, with few exceptions. The only character I didn't care for was Felix because he's a trap and I typically don't like those type of characters. Tappei does an excellent job introducing new characters, and I really enjoyed the scenes where Subaru meets Rem, Rom, and Beatrice for the first time. Rom is a character I appreciated a lot more upon my last couple viewings. I didn't realize just how smug this character can be, and her personality really shines through in the Memory Snow OVA. Rom is a good contrast to her sister Rem in that she's much more confident than Rem and is usually cold towards Subaru. I absolutely love the scenes with Subaru and Beatrice, the caretaker of Roswell's Forbidden Library. He's generally friendly and nice to her while she constantly tries to get rid of him. Beatrice usually keeps to herself and has a nasty attitude, I suppose. Her antisocial behavior is highlighted in the Memory Snow OVA. Another set of characters worth mentioning are the Royal Selection candidates. ReZero's first season might not have time to dedicate to its story, but it at least does a decent job establishing its setting and its world building retains a good pace. Subaru arrived in the kingdom of Lagunica during a time where they have no king and are about to conduct an election for a new ruler. There are a couple of episodes that focus on the start of the election and introduce several new characters which I found really entertaining. Out of all the candidates, my favorites would probably have to be Priscilla Boreal and Cruce Karsten. I like Cruce because she speaks with wisdom and never seems to lose her composure. She's always rational, polite, and carries herself in a dignified manner. Plus, she's good in combat and has the charisma to lead dozens of men into battle, as shown during the attack on the White Whale. Now that I think about it, out of all the candidates, she's probably the most fit to lead the country. As for why I like Priscilla, it's probably her personality. She's self-absorbed, conceited, and treats everyone else around her like they're beneath her. I also really like the voice acting for the character. Faye Mata, who also does the voice of Aqua from Konosuba, does an excellent job voicing Priscilla. In general, the voice acting in ReZero is perfect. Brianna Knickerbocker and Kaylee Mills give a wonderful performance as Amelia and Rim, respectively. Sean Chiplock really showcases a lot of range given the wide range of emotions the character exhibits throughout the season. Aside from the voice acting, the music and sound effects are phenomenal. The music done by Myth and Royd really fits the tone of every scene it's inserted into, and the second opening is fantastic. It would be totally neglectful of me not to mention Call of the Witch. This ominous, dreadful little song plays each time Subaru dies and uses Return by Death. This song is very iconic. When you think about ReZero, Call of the Witch is probably one of the first things that comes to your mind. The soundtrack has some other unsettling tracks, but this song is probably without a doubt the best one. Unlike a lot of typical fantasy isekai, ReZero can be very dark and eerie. This is a very violent and bloody series that doesn't hold back when it comes to showing dismemberment. There is some gruesome imagery in the series, and Subaru goes through so much stress, pain, and suffering that it affects his mental state on several occasions. Subaru's moments of anguish and anxiety are executed really well, and White Fox Studio does an incredible job with his facial expressions. In general, the 2D animation is excellent, especially during action scenes where characters are fighting using magic, spirit arts, and weaponry. The studio often makes good use of different perspectives and camera movements. I think they did a good job handling the large-scale battle against the White Whale during the second half of the season. The only negative thing I have to say in regards to the animation is that the CG really stands out in many scenes. White Fox often uses CG for the random people and creatures as they go about their daily lives in the capital. The creatures made by the Witch of Envy called Mob Beast, and the ground dragons used to pull carriages. It isn't the worst CG I've seen, but it's hard not to notice the difference in quality when comparing it to the beautiful 2D art and backgrounds. The last thing I have to mention before I close this review out is just how perfect the ending is for Season 1. Without spoiling too much, the last scene with Subaru and Amelia talking is excellent and is yet another example of ReZero's great dialogue. What I love about this scene is how it almost mirrors the scene with Subaru and Rim talking in From Zero, but the roles are reversed. Subaru is now the one being affectionate and comforting. Through his dialogue and his actions that led up to this scene, it really shows how much he's grown. This happy and heartwarming ending seems like a fitting way to end a season that is filled with a lot of death and despair. I love how bright this scene is and how it looks like the characters are bathed in light near the very end. The scene is a really nice contrast to the large majority of the second half, which got really dark and brutal. Overall, ReZero is a unique fantasy isekai series that differentiates itself from other series in the genre with its darker tone and more mature take on the typical isekai protagonist. Due to the nature of its major hook, Return by Death, the show doesn't have a lot of time to expand on its story and can unfortunately be redundant. However, the first season manages to fill out its world with likable characters and interesting lore. The presentation is top-notch, with the only notable flaw being the CG for certain elements of the show. Lastly, while the dialogue might not work for everyone, there is some undeniably good dialogue in quite a few scenes. So what did you think about the first season of ReZero? Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, if there's an anime or manga that you would like to see me do a review or a first impressions on, consider becoming a member of the channel, donating via the PayPal link in the description, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/FearnoHate. As always, thanks for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.